Hello, I'm Dennis Nixon, and I'm going to take you through A3 storytelling. And basically, this is about process problem solving in organizations. You might be wondering why it's about storytelling when you're wanting to improve things, but we'll cover all that. In this presentation, I will guide you through how to write the A3 problem solving story. Now, you're writing it, but you're actually living the story as well. So you're living the story and then capturing it on the A3 sheet of paper. You can see the size of the sheet here, and A3 is this ISO standard for a particular size of paper. And it's twice the regular size of paper that you would use in a photocopy machine. The sheet of paper is not all that useful unless you have a template on it. And this is the template that you use on your A3 paper. You will find in your package a file which allows you to have these A3s printed, and you can either print them on your printer at work if it takes A3 paper, or you can have it printed at some stationery store or some printer outside. But you do need to have this template printed on the paper. So the A3 template is where you're going to write your story. And there's some reasons why you're writing the story. The story is basically capturing your journey that you are taking as you are solving the problem that you're working on. And it's helpful when you finish the solving to share with people what changes were made and why they worked. But it's also useful as you're going on the journey because you'll invite other people to help you. And you'll be able to use the A3 story to bring them up to speed as to exactly where you are at that particular point when you need the help. So the story is simply about how you solve your chosen problem. On the template there are 8 different boxes, and each one of these boxes is a step in the process that, if you follow it correctly, will solve your problem for you 100% of the time. So it forces you to do process thinking as you're moving through your problem solving. I'm going to encourage you to use a pencil and an eraser as you use the A3 sheet to tell your story. The reason for this is that the journey that you're on has certain aspects to it that are iterative. You'll be doing something, you'll learn something new, and that'll change part of your story. So you want to be able to erase what you've done and replace it with the new information or new decision or new insight that you have made. Now, you can go ahead and set this whole thing up digitally. The only trouble with digital is there'll be a tendency to write too many words. And you will see later that we spend more time with little pictures or drawings or things of that nature in telling the story than actually a whole lot of words. The 8 boxes in the template are also your chapter headings in the story that you're telling. You're going to give your story a title, and you'll give some background to the story, and then you will be explaining what's currently happening. And you're also going to set a goal or a target for what it is you want to improve. So what's it going to look like after you've done the improvement? Root cause analysis we'll go into in some depth, because improving anything, you want to find out what's causing the problem that you want to solve before you start looking for what we call elegant solutions. And once you have the solutions, you then have to implement it. So you'll have an implementation plan, you'll implement that, and then afterwards you'll follow up to see whether you have in fact solved the problem that you set out to solve. So a bit more about stories. Why a story? Stories are powerful ways to communicate, and people love them. That's why we go to movies and why we watch TV and we use Netflix. The story that you're going to tell captures the disciplined thinking and actions that you have used to get to the climax. And the climax is demonstrating that the problem has been solved. QED, as we did with our maths problems. Quod erat demonstrandum, that which was to be demonstrated. So in other words, you will be telling the story about how you solved the problem and came to the solutions that you did. Practically, you're going to use the A3 story to share with others, particularly those from whom you need input or help. And being clear and having it all on one page makes this easy and consistent when sharing with a number of people. So if you want to ask somebody to help you, you don't have to say, oh, I better put together a presentation to show them what it's about, because you already have it. And it's up to date with as far as you've gone. The A3 story also saves you from having to put together presentations each time you want to update somebody, or at the end of it when you want to present to your boss and others the work that you've done, what you've implemented, and the results that you've got. But most importantly, it keeps you focused on solving the problem. If you had to write a book and you were on chapter 1 and you had no idea what the story was about, you'd have great difficulty in getting going. But as you write the book and you get through each chapter, you are led naturally into finding out and getting the information you need to write the next chapter. So the first box and step in the process is title. And you're going to make up a title that clearly captures what the problem is that you want to solve. And this is useful when you're talking to somebody, because they see, okay, that's the title, and you explain what it is, and they've got a very good idea of the problem you're trying to solve. So it should be memorable and useful as shorthand reference to it. And provided the above 3 things, clearly tells the reader, captures the crux, is memorable, it's quite fun. So I'll tell you about one problem-solving thing I embarked on, which is called the flat scone. And it was called that because I was trying to bake scones that rose very well and were nice and fluffy. And when I set out to do it, I was getting the result, which turned out to be a flat scone, almost like a biscuit. So, flat scones. Step 2, background. The background is your starting point. It sort of explains what problem you are addressing and why it is important. And I recommend you use drawings or diagrams wherever possible. So here's a snapshot of my background that I wrote for my flat scone. The history to it was that my mother used to bake these incredible scones, and I loved them. And one day I just had this intention that I was going to make scones like my mother and really enjoy them. And the essence of them is they fluff up very nicely. And in fact, when you take a scone that's well cooked and you just twist it a little bit, it breaks apart in the middle. And you can slather great cream on it and put strawberry jam on top. And you have it with a cup of tea or coffee, and it's just delicious. So what I showed in my background here was that I went online and I found a recipe that 1,200 people had said was great. They gave it a thumbs up. So I said, well, if that many people love the recipe, it must be a good recipe. It makes sense, right? So I used that recipe and was hoping to get these nice fluffy scones. But unfortunately, it came out more like a dry biscuit. In other words, it was just a flat scone. But I had no idea what the reason for it is. So that was the background as to why I'm trying to solve this problem. At this point, you go into current conditions, in other words, what's happening right now. And you really become a detective because you're looking for facts about the process that is causing the problem that you want to solve. So the first thing I did was actually map the process, and it's normally 5 to 8 steps high. And you've got a PDF in your package which you can download, which gives you details on how to map the process. In the case of the flat scone, it was quite easy because the recipe, in fact, is a process. It gives you all the ingredients that are coming in and tells you how to change them by mixing them all up and what to do with them, and then you should get the result at the end of the day. So for me, it was quite simple to map out the process. The next step in current conditions is measures. You want to collect measures, and again, there's a PDF you can download that gives you more detailed information on how to do this for your problem. In the case of the flat scone, there were ingredients saying 300 grams of this, 50 grams of that, and what's important with your measures is that you actually check and you go and have a look to see that they are happening. So when I was doing this, I was actually checking, is that 300 grams of flour? Is it the right type of flour? Is that 50 grams of sugar? Is that the right type of sugar? So I took all these measures, but I didn't take them for granted. I didn't just look at the recipe and say, yeah, I did that. I actually made sure and checked that I did it. So there's a thing called Gamba, which means actually going to the site and seeing what's happening. And with measures, you need to really go and measure, not just interview somebody and saying, how long does that take you? Because they'll get the answer wrong every time. So you take a stopwatch from or a timer on your phone, and you actually measure how long it takes. The TGWs that's there on the slide stands for things that go wrong. And what's important as you're observing what's happening in the current conditions of the process that you're watching is if you see something going wrong, you just make a note of it. You don't have to try and solve it or change it or anything like that. You just note that this actually happened. And later on you will use that to good effect. It's really critical that you talk to the customers and the stakeholders of whatever process it is that you're looking at. And you interview them about their experience and their observations of the process that's causing the problem. So again, there's a PDF you can download, and there's a lot of advice on how to conduct the interview so you get the information that you're looking for. I mentioned Gemba before, and Gemba is a Japanese word, and it's the equivalent of saying actually go to the site where it's happening. So in a detective analogy, it's going to the scene of the crime. And you know that detectives, when they go to the scene of the crime, they take cameras and they take pictures and they take notes and they look at everything. And then they might bring in even the forensic people to get into the real detail to see what's going on. So have this concept in your mind that you're a detective and you're going to observe and see what's really happening in this process. So that is what Gamba means, is going to the scene of the crime. The basic principle behind A3 thinking is that you cannot go to solutions until you have an idea of what's causing the problem. So at this stage, as you're observing, you might see something and you think, oh, we can do that better. And you start thinking about solutions and, oh, we're going to implement that and change that. Might even be tempted to change it. At this stage where you're just looking at current conditions, you must not make any solutions. Now, that doesn't mean you won't come up with some. But if you think of something as a solution, put it in a list under parking lot and later on it's still there, it's not going away, you're not going to forget it, and it might or might not be useful later on. The same thing with things that are going wrong, the TGWs. Make sure you capture those on a separate list. Once you have a clear idea of the current condition, and you've got the things that are going wrong, and you've noticed some things that are going right and what's happening, now you're ready to write the story of current conditions into your template. But please use drawings and graphs and numbers and very few words. You want to be able to have some icons and things that allow you to tell the story. So in my flat scone, as you saw when I was giving the background, I just had 3 little drawings, or 3 drawings and a question mark. But I was able to tell you the story based on those. You don't want to include all the details that you have learned. You might have an Excel spreadsheet that is filled with data, but you don't have to put all that data in your present condition. Rather, you want to extract from it the insights that you have made. And this summarizing is part of the process thinking. It forces you to extract what is important to your story of the problem that you are currently solving. So you now have a title. You explain what the problem is you're trying to solve, and you know exactly what's going on in the process that is causing that problem. So the next step is, what are you going to create if you solve this problem? What is it you're trying to go for? And we talk about goals and targets. Now, a target is a number. So if you want to improve something by 10%, that's a number. But a goal can be words. Like you want to really dramatically improve customer service. Could be a goal. The actual measure of how you know whether you've done that would become the number. So compare increased sales by 20% to increase sales capability to sustain sales growth, which is a goal. So you can have numbers and words or a mixture of them. But it must be related to the problem that you're trying to solve, obviously. I say that because sometimes you're solving a problem and you're getting carried away in some big dream of what you can possibly be creating. But you need to be focused here on the goal or target that's going to be achieved with solving your problem. We now get into the real heart of the matter. What is holding you back from achieving those goals and those targets? What is causing the problem? And that is the root cause. And the root is really the most basic underlying reason for the problem occurring. And you want to find it, and you want to prove that that is the right root cause before you move on to anything else. I've said this before, but it's worth repeating. Never think about solutions until you've proved that you have found the root cause. Otherwise, you will have what we call kangaroo solutions, which probably will create more problems down the road than will solve anything. So by this time, because you've been observing the process and you've got data, you've probably got some gut feel of this possible root causes of the problem. And that's where we expect you to be at this time. In fact, you'll be getting a little bit ready to jump to root causes now because you want to solve the problem, and you have probably starting to get some idea. You think you know where the problem is. At this time, we use the fishbone diagram, which is designed to capture and organize any and all possible root causes. So whether you're doing this alone or whether you're doing it with other people who are involved in your problem solving, you want to use the fishbone diagram. Now there's a detailed presentation in your package which will tell you exactly how to do that. But at the end of the day, what you'll have on this diagram of just the bones of a fish you'll have every possible root cause that you believe is a real possibility of being a root cause. And that'll be the outcome of that work. So you will go to that presentation to do that when you get to the step. The last step in filling out the fishbone diagram is to actually select the most likely root cause. So out of all the root causes that you've looked at, you're now selecting one that you think, oh, this is definitely it. And what you're going to do then is to prove that you have chosen correctly. Session to choose the next one. Now we use a scientific method to prove the root cause, and there's a full explanation in a PDF in the package. So when you get to this point, you will use that PDF to guide you through how to design the experiment to prove that what you've selected is the root cause. Sometimes when you run the experiment, what you prove is that the root cause that you selected is not the root cause. And that's a time for celebration, because it means you're not going to waste time on trying to come up with solutions to fix something that's actually not going to make any difference. So don't worry about it if the experimentation proves that you got the wrong root cause. You simply go back to the fish diagram and do a vote. If you do prove that you got the right root cause, then you can start thinking about solutions. Yay, that's great. This is what you've been looking for. We have a tendency always to want to jump to solution, like those crazy Australian kangaroos. So if that is the case, then we move on to looking at and inventing elegant solutions. Again, in your package is the PDF guide with details on how to go about inventing elegant solutions. When you have an elegant solution that is simple, effective, and new, then you design a prototype and test the prototype to see that it resolves the root cause you have identified. When the prototype is successful, you move on to implementing the needed changes. Now you can see pictures of the little black dress that Audrey Hepburn made famous in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And in a business sense, the words we use to describe an elegant solution is that it's simple, it's effective, and it's new to the process that you're looking at. You don't have to invent something that's new to the world. You're simply inventing something that's new to the process. In other words, you're doing the process in a different way, even though that way might not be new to the world. In the case of elegant with Audrey Hepburn, it was elegant because the dress design is very simple. It was really effective in showing off her beauty and making her very attractive. And it was also new at the time that it came out. So those are the words we use looking from a business point of view, that it's simple, it's effective, and it's new to the process that you're looking at. Once you have these elegant solutions, the next step is implementing them. And in fact, nothing is achieved yet in your story. You've been telling the story of how you got there, you got these great solutions, but until they're implemented, nothing's actually changed. Now again, we have a PDF guide with all the details on how to go about planning and implementing your elegant solution. When you're implementing something, you're actually changing something. And if you start thinking about change, all change is made up of starting something, stopping something, and continuing to do something. So mainly with elegant solutions, it's starting something, but very often it's doing it in a way that's different. So you're stopping the old way of doing it and starting the new way of doing it. And so at the beginning of coming up with implementation, you get very clear on all the things that need to be started to doing and anything that needs to be stopped doing. And that makes your planning and implementation much easier. Implementation is really a project, and the essence of project is that you've got a clear idea of what it is you're implementing, what resources you need to implement it, and what the value of you doing that is. And when you look at the work of a project, it always breaks down into what we call work packages. And each little work package basically includes who does what, by when, with what resources. And sometimes a work package might be dependent on another, that the other one has to be completed first. So for example, if you're putting stucco plaster on a wall and it has to be painted and your work package is painting, then the stucco has to be plastered on the wall and it has to dry out and be ready before you start your painting. So your painting is dependent on that. There's a lot more detail on this in the PDF guide to implementing your solutions. One of the keys to success in targeting change is that the bosses and the people who are targets understand why the changes are being made and the value that would create. So communication then will be one or more of the work packages. I'd like you to do a little exercise. I want you to take your arms and just fold them. And then have a look at which one of your arms is on top. In my case, it's my right arm. It's on top. Now I want you to unfold your arms and fold them so that the other hand that wasn't on top is now on top. So now my left hand is on top. But I noticed when I did it, I had to stop and think a little bit about how does this happen. And I'm sure you felt the same. This little exercise is a metaphor, if you like, for what we call resistance to change. None of us like to change. And if I said to you that from now on, for some very good reason, you had to fold your arms with the other hand on top, you would have difficulty at first. You might do it and then you might slip back and do it the other way. You might resent the fact that you have to change it. But if you're very clear on the reason for the change, then you're more likely to follow through on it. So one of the reasons why we do storytelling in the A3 form is that you can speak to the people who are the targets of change and explain to them exactly why these changes have been made and what the results are going to be. And then you'll find they're more likely to follow through and support the changes, even though they feel uncomfortable, like reversing the way you fold your arms. In all your problem solving that you've done, nothing changes unless it's changed, right? So you're getting no different results until all the changes are made. So once you've implemented things, you want them to settle down a bit. And that's because you want to get them used to the different way of crossing their arms, which is a metaphor for the change that you're asking them to make. So you don't want to tell them on day one and then measure on day one to see how things are going. You want the process to settle down so that people are kind of automatically now doing what they're supposed to be doing. So with these changes, we want to allow them to settle down for a little bit. And depending on how much change is made, it might be a week or two, or it might just be days, depending on, how difficult the changes are and so on. And the settling down is so that the operators will need a while to get used to doing things differently. So if you told everybody to fold their arms differently, and then you went back after half an hour, you'd be surprised to find some of them hadn't done it yet. Because it takes time to get used to change and to get into a rhythm. And so you allow a little time to go by before going in to measure whether in fact change has taken place. So once you think that things have settled down, you do Gemba, you go and walk and you actually observe and you look to see that the changes are in fact happening. And if the changes are not being followed, then you take the time to correct them, talk to the people again, remind them of the importance, and then allow some time for them to settle down again. You don't want to collect data when the implementation has not been successful. And don't be surprised if there's a little bit of iteration at this time. They might have made changes, but they might have not done them exactly as they were designed. So at this stage, you'll do Gemba, go to the site, actually observe that the changes are happening, and making sure that the solution has been implemented and being followed. Because you don't want to get results if the process hasn't been changed in the way that it was designed. If the results are meeting your goals and targets, in other words, they're the results that you needed, that's really, really good, right? If they are not yet what's needed, then you might have to look for the root cause of the gap and go through inventing a solution again. So again, everything is factually based. And if you've made all these changes and they're not working 100%, all it means is that there's some other cause somewhere that you haven't been able to pick up on. And so don't let it worry you that you might have to go back again, do a bit more work. But keep in mind that you want to achieve your goal or your target, and that's why you do this measurement.